All right, so this is for video about Rotation 2, Session 2. So they just came out of their lesson plan around the importance of, or the difference between the ISC and the ISP. And then you let them know, okay, so as we get, we talked about one of the first steps in the ISC, maybe even ask a student, if you wrote it in your digital notebook, what was step one? And as step one, as how I described the ISC, was personal reflection and analysis of our individual roles within a given society. So hopefully one of your kids wrote that down and can share. If not, you can say, one of the things I talked about in the last class was about this personal reflection about our roles within society. So that's part of our goal today. We're going to understand identity. This is a goal that we're going to explore over a couple of days, not just today, but have a student maybe read it out. We're going to understand identity, how it intersects and impacts how people are perceived. So the first thing that we need to do is fill out an identity chart. So in Schoology, you'll see that you have been given a Google Drive assignment that has an identity chart. I just did that, and what you're going to want to tell them is, I did that just so everyone has their own chart to fill out. That's why it's created as a Google Drive assignment. You will need this for reflection, but you're not going to have to turn this in. You're never going to have to turn this in or show this to anyone. Like Emily was mentioning in the meeting, important for us to say that to kids, because I'm going to make it, or I did make it, as this exact chart in a Google document, and I'm going to create as a Google Drive assignment, so it creates all of my kids their own copy, but not make it as an assignment they obviously have to turn in. They never have to turn it in, and so tell them that. So here's what I decided to do. Instead of just having my identity chart, what I did is just created one that was filled out with lots of examples and some important definitions on the side. So you can put this on the screen, talk through some of these, and then you can give examples personally if you feel comfortable. So because we're all kind of using the same slides, and I didn't want to put my filled out chart here and then you guys would have to fill out your own. So I just created one with lots of examples and explanations and definitions, and then you can just walk through and give an example. So for example, so I might say, so guys, there's some terms here that might feel new to you or we're not totally clear on. So here's an example. I'm going to leave this on the screen while you fill out your identity charts. For example, let's start with ethnicity and race. Those are actually two different things. Ethnicity is a shared culture that's often based on country or your parents' country of origin. So for me, I consider myself ethnically Colombian and Filipino. That's the culture I grew up in because my mother is Colombian, my father's Filipino, and that's the culture that I was around. Race is actually a construct that has nothing really to do with country, and nothing at all to do with country, but it has everything to do with skin color and phenotype or specific physical features. So it's not about country or geography. It's about what society has categorized you as based off of what you look like. That can be white, black, indigenous, Asian, brown, moreno, mulatto, sambo. There's lots of different racial categories because they vary from country to country. In Brazil, there's preto, there's prado, there's all these different terms, but it's all based on skin color and physical features. Socioeconomic class is obviously pretty self-explanatory. Most of the rest of them are self-explanatory. You might want to give a little, gender identity is how a person internally senses and experiences a wide characteristics associated with masculinity and femininity. It's what they identify as. So as male, as female, maybe some folks identify as gender nonconforming, or as transgender, meaning they identify as a different gender than the sex that they were assigned at birth. Sexual orientation. I think here, making clear that sexual orientation has nothing to do with gender. Sexual orientation is just who you are attracted to. Heterosexual, queer. Queer is like a blanket. A lot of kids don't know what queer means until you would want to describe queer being sort of the umbrella term for not heterosexual. And that could be lesbian, gay, bisexual, pansexual, age, national origin, first language. All of those are fairly self-explanatory. So what I did here is just created this chart that you could leave on the screen while they fill out theirs. You might do some explaining here. I would hit on race, ethnicity, gender. That's the ones I put those definitions next to because those tend to be the tricky ones with kids. And give your own examples if you want, or just rely on the examples here in this chart. Give them a minute to do their identity chart, and then we go into the activity. Tell them, step one, in your chart, go ahead and number these, your identity wheel or your identity chart, starting somewhere random, meaning you don't need to number all the way down the chart, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Use all 10 numbers, but make it super random. The reason is that it's going to ensure that our activity is still based on anonymity. We don't want people having the same numbers, so you might put 2, 7, 5, 6, 9, just make sure you use all 10 numbers and you randomly put them throughout your chart. Step 2, you explain the directions of the activity. I'm going to call in a number and read a statement based on the part of your identity alone that number reflects. So just that part of your identity, not your whole identity, just whatever that number is. You'll decide if the statement applies to you. If it does apply, keep your camera on. If the statement does not apply, go ahead and turn your camera off. So for example, what that looks like, identity reflection example. Let's say I say 3, and for me, my 3 happens to be socioeconomic status. So what is my socioeconomic status? I think about it. Okay, I'm wealthy middle class. The statement is, I can be sure to see positive representation of myself on TV. So I think, as a wealthy middle class woman, am I positively represented on TV quite often? Yeah, I think so. I think for the most part, I'm seen positively. So I would keep my camera on. If I disagreed with this statement based on my identity, whatever that number was on my chart, I would turn my camera off. Any questions? Anything I can clarify? Cool. No. Then we go. 4, read the statement. 7, read the statement. 2, read the statement. 5, read the statement. So on and so forth. You go through all of these with them. Camera's on, off. Done. All right, folks. So we're going to go into some breakout rooms. And you're going to reflect. I'm going to leave this on the screen so you guys don't have to memorize these. You don't have to have memorized the statements. But I want in your breakout rooms to think about how did a specific part of your identity shape your choices. Share in your breakout room. Do you think it would have been different if your numbers were different? For example, I look at statement number 6. I would feel safe walking home. If it landed on my socioeconomic, and that's the example I talked about in the meeting, you might want to give them an example here. Like, yeah, because thinking about my socioeconomic, I would have kept my camera on because I live in a really safe neighborhood. But if it landed on blank, and maybe give them an example from your own experience of how it might change based on the number. Consider giving a specific example to share in your groups. Put them in breakout rooms to share. I think that these breakout rooms should be at least 10 minutes to just like talk about this whole activity. And then have them say, okay, so before we close, guys, a couple of notes. We're going to continue to explore identity. We're going to continue to explore this concept. We are not done with this journey, but let's go ahead and give it a definition. Here's your definition of identity, the many layers of who you are, what you think about yourself, and the ways you are viewed by the world. Give them a second to write that down in their notebooks. And then say, another thing that we kind of explored today, and we're going to continue to explore, is this idea of intersectionality, that our identities are not one thing, but they are often woven together. This means our experiences in society can change, that I'm not always experiencing the same thing because my identity is many different layers. There can be compounded advantages for some and compounded targeting for others. You can define advantage and targeted. This is what I talked about in one of our meetings where I say I don't use certain words that could be controversial, quote unquote, for kids until I absolutely have to. So here, instead of ever using the word privilege, we made it a common part of our vernacular, Julian and Kaylin and I, to use the terms advantage and targeted. Provides more opportunity and benefit, limits opportunity, creates prejudice. So you have them take those notes, tell them, all right, that's it for today. We're going to continue to come back around to this goal of identity, thinking about how our identities impact our experience in society, and we'll be doing that in our next class. And that is the end of Rotation 2, Session 2.